Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our session today. Glad to see you. Another journey into urgency-based selling. Bold vision, bold behavior. Today's session is on your 2-minute drill to rally month-end sales. The motivation for this program came from a client with whom I worked for about, 6 months. We had weekly sessions with the sales team. CEO did not come to every session, but when he did, I would have leadership corner. He would talk. And every month he was there. As we approached month end, the CEO would start reminding everybody that numbers. So it occurred to me, it's like a 2-minute drill, like in football, And every month we're doing a 2-minute drill. So I started saying to the sales team, for those people who are having trouble hitting their numbers, not everyone, do we need to wait for month end to do a 2-minute drill? The underlying core issue is, what is our sense of urgency? A best efforts basis or a do or die basis? My general experience is that when you're doing business development, when you're trying to open new accounts, if you give it your very best effort, unless the competition is messing up, you will never close any business. We have to approach it on a do or die basis. The right mindset is critical for the 2-minute drill. Collins, in Good to Great, offers us the metaphor of the window and the mirror. Let's take a look at how it works. If things go well, you look outside the window as I am, and you give credit to the team. If things don't go well, you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, what else could I have done? Now, the opposite, a dysfunctional approach, won't support the 2-minute drill, is when things go well, you look in the mirror, you pat yourself on the back. Things don't go well, you look outside the window and say, who could I blame? So the mirror is the opposite of learned helplessness, and if you want to do well, if you want to be aligned with leadership's perspective, we got to use the mirror properly. Got to use the mirror properly. So if you have your fundamentals in place, here are the ideas we're going to discuss for your 2-minute drill to increase the likelihood you'll hit your numbers. Focus on closing deals with the strongest PIKs, payments in kind. Use the fast track technique. Confirm the must-haves, and then use them for engaging the prospect. Make sure internal urgency is in place before you use an external motivator. Make sure you've mitigated risk, that you've done the company sale, and find a trigger point for action. Now, an obvious starting point is that effort drives luck. If you make enough effort, sales calls, you get lucky. My rule of thumb is try to have $5 of good opportunity in the pipeline for every dollar you need to close. Now, good opportunity means it's a serious conversation. We distinguish between safe and serious conversations. In a safe conversation, you're never going to get a stick of business. The prospect's typically in that conversation for a different reason than you, most likely a price check. In a serious conversation, the prospect has a compelling need, and they're willing to discuss it with you. You could earn the right to their business. How do you know if it's safe or serious? You watch the PIKs, the payments in kind. The payments in kind are the behaviors the buyers do to show they're committed to the process and that they're serious. And PIKs provide strong raw material for your 2-minute drill. Let's look at a couple of examples of PIKs. The buyer invests the time and/or puts political capital at risk. They might introduce you to their CEO or their supervisor. They complete a credit application. They visit our facility. Very often, if they have one themselves, you tour their plant. Are there others? How do you know it's serious in your business? This is a great power of the wisdom in the room exercise you might want to do with your team. Brainstorm. What are the effective PIKs, payments in kind, that work in your business? They'll be a little bit different in every business. An example of a PIK in action. Prospect had interest. They wanted a proposal. Good conversation. But our salesperson assessed the buyer as a price shopper. He's going to go for the lowest price. The salesperson decided that the prospect did not know enough to pay for the value add. So the salesperson asked the prospect to do a PIK, check references before giving a proposal. The prospect checked the reference, catalyzed the process, skin in the game, close the sale. Now, PIKs, by the way, resolve what I consider the fundamental paradox in selling between urgency and neediness. A prospect wants us to act with a sense of urgency, but when they do, some prospects think we're needy and they can hang us out to dry, and they extend the selling cycle. They think maybe they can get a fire sale. So PIKs are one way to convey that we're not needy because we ask them to act in a fair and reasonable manner for someone who's interested in our product. If we sell strongly with a focus on earning the right to wows, we're going to get more PIKs, payments in kind. But are we bold enough in our vision and bold enough in our behavior to earn the right to the wow? Here I draw to your attention a famous quote from George Bernard Shaw, who wrote, among other things, Pygmalion. The reasonable person adapts to the world. The unreasonable person persists in trying to get the world to adapt to their vision. All progress depends on the unreasonable person. So the question for you to consider is, are you being sufficiently unreasonable? Are you asking for enough after leading with bold vision, bold behavior? So you have to be bold. Are you paying attention? Here's an example of bold behavior and satisfying the 2-minute drill. Our saleswoman is 24 years old, and she is trying to sell an advertising promotion to a brand manager at a pharmaceutical company. It's very hard to get on the advertising schedule. Now, the brand manager is about 50 years old, is a man, and our saleswoman has gotten the appointment, but she's getting yes to death. Yep. She's presenting and getting yes to death. So at a certain point with coaching, she said, are you paying attention? Are you being serious? And, the buyer was like a slap on the side of, said, go ahead and do that again. Did it again. This time the buyer was really paying attention, was serious, and said, let me see who I can replace on my advertising schedule, and on the spot closed a $50,000 sale by being bold. Are you being bold enough? Let's review the preconditions for your best 2-minute drill. You have a strong overall selling system, and you're doing the system. And in addition, you have the right mindset. You're doing do or die versus best efforts. You have great selling tools, great selling process. When all these are aligned, the right mindset, the right selling tools, the right selling process, You develop relationships and harvest PIKs, payments in kind, and then you can manage the whole thing. So let's assume all this is in place. We have a strong standard sales call. Now, what goes into your standard sales call? 1 to 7 sets up the serious conversation. How do we know it's serious? Watch the PIKs, one of which is good fact finding, so that we learn the closing conditions. More on that in a bit. And then we could prove we're the solution and harvest a result. You'll notice step 17 here points to either you close or you get a payment in kind. That's what we're always looking for. And you also have a strong battle plan. So these things are in place. The fly in the ointment. Let's assume you sell with bold vision, bold behavior. You've earned the right to PIKs. You've harvested them from wows. You got plenty in the pipeline. You have a strong standard sales call and battle plan, but you still need to close more in the pipeline. What can you do? By the way, this is another great power of the wisdom in the room exercise. Get the team together and brainstorm. How do you handle your 2-minute drill to generate more sales in this month for right now? So here's a thought question. Have you made the company sale? Have you mitigated risk? You know, the most important sale is the salesperson's sale. If we don't make that one, you can't make the offer sale and the company sale. The company sale is the risk mitigating sale. Can I rely on your company? This is very important if they haven't done business with us before or recently or a lot of business. So one way to make the company sale is to have a C-suite executive join you on a Zoom meeting, audio call, or sales call, because it reduces the perceived risk. Prospects in general will buy from the least risky scenario, which is the incumbent. Now, if you want to get a little fancier, I'm going to offer you now a 4-part sequence for reducing perceived risk. You start with the science of the business. This is a company that sells air monitoring equipment. So we show people the underlying system, the statistics that it yields, 99% plus airtime. So this goes into a flow manufacturing process where you have to monitor the air quality. And that gives credibility to our warranty. The warranty is believable because we've shared the processes and the statistics, and then we validate it with testimonials, in this case from clients all over the world. So one thing that, in my experience, salespeople often don't emphasize is what I call the science of the business and the statistics. Here's a risk aversion tip. We tend to overvalue the extremes. This chart appears in Kahneman's book called Thinking Fast and Slow. What Kahneman discovered, he was a Nobel Prize winning economist who did a lot of study of risk aversion, is that to increase the probability of success 5% to get to 100%, people will pay 20% of the total cost. Because we're risk averse, we will pay for certainty. So can you offer certainty or greater certainty to this prospect you're trying to close in your 2-minute drill? What about the fast track technique? Now, when a prospect expresses any interest, you might say, hey, you want to learn more about X, about our delivery or our quality? That's great. Do you want to do it on a fast track or back burner basis? If you've done a great job with your standard sales call, they'll typically say fast track, and you could set up your PIK or closing the sale from that point in the process. It also sets up important questioning if you haven't done all your fact finding yet. So you might say, hey, to fast track, we need to review these points or to take these steps. The urgency, the closing conditions. In some ways, the most important part of your standard sales call, or the thing to which it's directed, is discovering the closing conditions. The series of conditions which, when met, result in the sale. So we're looking for urgency, not interest. The why and why not of the why and why now of the situation. The must-have, not the nice-to-have. If you want to look at it as an input-output machine, after you've done fact-finding, you might know 100 different things about the prospect, the company, and the needs. But if you do the must-have move correctly, and I'm going to show you a technique in a moment, you get a small series of closing conditions, which you can then try to meet to close the sale. We offer you the theory of the glasses. On any decision maker's desk, there's a series of glasses. They're invisible. Each one stands for a decision criteria. After you get into a conversation as your first milestone, one of your next major milestones in the process is to discover the closing conditions, the series of conditions which, when met, result in the sale. Now, let's say there were 4 conditions which I've laid out on the screen. If you only know 3 of them, you can never be in control. So the ideal situation is you do know them and you are in control. Now, if you know them, that doesn't mean that you're definitely going to close, but if you know them, it means you know if you can close, if you have the fit. So once you know the names of the glasses, filling the glasses is a metaphor for meeting the prospect's needs. And if we meet all the needs, that's a good thing, right? Maybe we could just close the sale. Now, how do you learn the must-haves? Here's a 2-step, or actually a 3-step procedure. After your fact-finding, you bridge into it by saying, I have the sense that X is a huge issue, and you got to use the words must-have, a definite must-have. So on-time delivery. What else is a must-have? If you've done this properly, if you've created a serious conversation, if you've wowed them, they'll give you the must-haves. And then you have to ask the qualifying question. Hey, if I can meet these conditions, can we do some business? This is particularly valuable when you have a month-end incentive to offer. But there could be a problem. They may give you a series of conditions that are not uncontested space. In order for you to pry business away from the competitor, we often need to establish uncontested space. This idea is emphasized in the book Blue Ocean Strategy, which differentiates between red oceans of red ink, cutthroat competition, and the tranquil blue oceans of uncontested space. One of the most important jobs of a salesperson is, through their fact-finding, to discover what is uncontested space. Once you have uncontested space, when you meet the needs, you can close the sale. Now, setting up fact-finding is so important because, well, let's take a look at what happened when a salesperson was doing the 2-minute drill. This salesperson had an annual program with a catalog customer. Every year, year after year, they bought about $20,000, $25,000 worth of product. It was a once-a-year program. Well, one year, this salesperson called too late. The category he sold was already filled. So what happened is the catalog house did their planning early. Like salesperson had it down, call them in May, and they did it in April. So the item they sold was a $3 item. It was a product. It was done. Now, the salesperson could have walked away dejected. But he asked a good question. Are any categories not completely bought? Turned out the $5 category wasn't bought, and this led to an immediate $25,000. Think again about your 2-minute drill here. Now, there are 2 types of urgency. The internal urgency asks the question, why? Why are you all at all interested in our product or service? And the internal urgency is fundamental, and we really need to know it to make good use of an external urgency, or why now. Like the why now could be because right now we're giving a month-end special. So the general rule is, first you have to establish the internal. There has to be a fundamental reason to do business with before you do the external, the dating terms or the discount at month end. Now, powerful messaging can also drive internal urgency and help your 2-minute drill. Here's just 3 messages. Our clients grow 20% faster than the industry average. 30% of our readers keep our magazine by the computer while they're doing research. And that analyzer machine example I gave you earlier, 99% uptime, which is really important in a 24/7, 7-day-a-week process business. Re-engagement, particularly for the radio silence case. I'm surprised I haven't heard back from you. Here's a subject line we have found to be effective when we marry it to the urgencies. This is why you need the must-haves, and particularly the why and why now. You told me you had these urgent needs. Have you been able to take care of them? If not, I'm surprised we haven't talked. And then, of course, learning the trigger for prospect action. On-time delivery is a common one. Until it gets to the trigger point, they're not ready to do business, not for a small variation. So it's important in your fact finding to discover when there's a problem, when will that problem become untenable? And that is an essential closing condition because it tells you when to revisit them as part of your 2-minute drill. So a review of what we've discussed today before we take questions. Some ideas to try for your 2-minute drill to hit your monthly numbers. Focus on closing deals with the strongest PIKs. Use the fast track technique to set up the PIK and the closing. Make sure you're discovering your must-haves as you go along, and if somebody has temporarily gone radio silent, you could use the must-have to re-engage. Make sure you have the internal urgency established before the external. The external, again, would be something like a price discount or dating terms. Make sure you've mitigated risk, the company sale. Remember that buyers will typically buy the less risky alternative, which is the incumbent, and find the trigger point for action. Well, we all know Rome wasn't built in a day, so we're almost at the end of today's program. If you have any questions, please send them to andyg@urgencybasedselling.net. Before we go to questions, I'll just mention our webinar next month, how to make better selling decisions. You know, the average salesperson makes dozens and dozens, maybe 100 decisions in a day. And I think we can make better decisions if we focus on 3 different kinds of thinking. Entrepreneurial thinking, bold vision, bold behavior, managing risk, meaning the prospect's sense of risk, and good project management skills. So that'll be our webinar in a month, and these all add up to alignment with leadership thinking. So I look forward to seeing you next month for that. Okay, we have a few minutes now for questions. Please put them in the chat if you have any questions. We have about 5-10 minutes. If you want information on the standard sales call or the battle plan, send me an email. We have a link to a somewhat popular webinar called I Don't Sell, I Have Relationships. Wow, I had a client recently who was 190 years old in business, and the team said, I don't sell, I have relationships, until we peeled back the onion and we found out how much selling there was. If you're a leader, a sales leader, we offer a 30-minute free consult for sales leaders. Here's where you'll reach out to me. Okay, let's see now if we have some questions. Here's the first one. Isn't it a sign of failure if you need to focus on the 2-minute drill? Shouldn't your strategy be strong enough so you don't need a 2-minute drill? Well, that's a good question. If we're doing all the right things all the time, hopefully we don't need the 2-minute drill. because you got more than enough good stuff in your pipeline, $5 of good stuff for every dollar you need. But I would say that if it's important to you to hit your numbers, it's a good idea for those months where there's negative variation. There are things that you should be able to do. We have relationships. Do we really need these PIK things? So I'll tell you a little bit more about our client. It was eighth generation owners, over 190 years in business. And initially what they said was, we've been around for 190 years. We know everybody. We sell everybody. So the owner had seen me present in a group of owners, and then referred me into the VP of sales. And the VP of sales said, we don't need selling. We know everybody. But he played nicely in the sandbox and allowed me to do a diagnostic. And what we discovered was there were a lot of conflict-laden situations. We wanted more market share with our existing customers. We wanted to upsell them items they weren't using. We wanted them to use our promotional program. So there was plenty of selling to do. And by the way, just as another takeaway, do you really know all the decision makers you need to know at every client? Neediness versus urgency and using PIKs. Is this really practical? Well, it's not practical in every case. And, I guess the implicit question is, can that piss some people off maybe? And the answer is yes. But I would say long term, you're going to sell a lot more if you qualify and use PIKs. I guess the next question is kind of related. This unreasonable stuff, that was the George Bernard Shaw quote. Is that really the way to create a good relationship, by challenging people? And I think the answer here is, if you're looking to open new relationships and the buyer is happy with the incumbent, you have to give them a very strong reason to change their behavior. And you need to be bold about it. Now, if the question is, if they're coming to you because they're unhappy with the incumbent, yeah, I would agree. You don't need to do this stuff. This is when you're trying to change the fundamentals and the buyer is essentially happy with the incumbent. I like that battle plan in theory, but doesn't this often fall apart in practice? The plan doesn't always work out as we plan it, does it? That's a fair comment. But if you do no planning at all, that's what you get, an unplanned situation. So I think it's kind of like the fog of war. You come in with a plan, and as you discover new facts on the ground, you adjust. But you're always taking your best shot, and you're trying to do it. And if you don't have any objectives, where are you going to wind up? Could you review the importance of the third sale, the company sale, compared to the salesperson sale? Okay, maybe I went over that a little quickly. The most important sale is the salesperson sale, establishing the talking relationship. But then there are two more sales to be made, at least. One is the offer. They have to be sold on your offer, product or service, or combined. And then there's the risk sale. And experience shows that a major reason why people don't change is they're afraid of the risk. We're risk averse. So the third sale is the company sale. And all too often, it's skipped by salespeople. The problem is, if you say to a buyer, I'll call you at 2 o'clock tomorrow, they may believe that you will call, and then you show that you do. But then if they're looking at switching vendors, that could be a big risk if you don't perform. And they don't necessarily believe that you have control over your organization or factory. So if you bring in a top management team member, they'll believe what a CEO says more so. Where do you get the last question I'll take for today? Where do you get the information for the first step of the 4-step proving process sequence, the processes? So I really didn't comment on this, and it's a much bigger conversation, but this is a great team building exercise, because when we do this, we pull in the operations department. And of course, if they're not keeping any metrics, you're not going to be able to get anything, but you could use this to stimulate the development of appropriate KPIs, key performance indicators. Well, folks, I think I'm going to call it a wrap right now. I thank you so much for joining us today. and we look forward to seeing you in a month when we talk about the kind of thinking methods that will help you maximize your sales. Bye now. Have a great month.